Welcome to Fun Facts Online. Today, we're journeying back to the dawn of civilization, to the sun-scorched plains of southern Iraq. This is the land of Sumer, where the world's first cities rose from the dust. For a long time, we thought the story of Sumer was simple. A brilliant people tamed the wild Tigris and Euphrates rivers with massive canals. And this mastery of engineering gave rise to kings, bureaucracies, and the city of Uruk. But what if that story is backwards? What if civilization didn't begin by taming the water, but by surrendering to its rhythm? New research in a field called Paleo-Hydrology, the study of ancient water systems, is rewriting this foundational chapter of human history. It tells a story not of grand canals, but of a unique marriage between river and ocean, a story where the daily pulse of the tide provided a natural, self-irrigating paradise that nurtured the first shoots of urban life. We're going to explore how this lost water world created, sustained, and ultimately challenged the world's first civilization. To understand Sumer, you have to imagine a landscape that no longer exists. Around 7,000 years ago, southern Mesopotamia was completely different. Thanks to higher global sea levels after the last ice age, the Persian Gulf reached much farther inland, perhaps as much as 250 kilometers north of where it is today. This put the future sites of the great Sumerian cities, Ur, Eridu, Uruk, right in the middle of a dynamic coastal environment, a sprawling delta where river, marsh, and sea were in a constant dance. This was Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers at its most literal. And these rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, were not calm and predictable like the Nile. Fed by snowmelt from mountains in Turkey, their floods were violent, sudden, and poorly timed for growing crops. The land itself is incredibly flat. There's only about a 30-meter drop in elevation between modern Baghdad and the Gulf. This means the rivers flow slowly, dropping huge amounts of silt that build up their own beds, creating natural raised banks or levees. This makes the rivers fundamentally unstable. A major flood could breach a levee, and the entire river could carve a new path across the plain, abandoning its old channel. This event, called avulsion, was a constant, landscape-altering force. Using satellite imagery and sediment cores, researchers have mapped at least 11 major course changes for both rivers over the last several thousand years. The locations of more than 8,000 ancient settlements line up perfectly with these old, dried-up river channels, showing just how dependent people were on the river's fickle movements. A city could thrive on the banks of a river one century, only to be left high and dry in the next. Between these shifting rivers lay one of the world's great wetlands, the Mesopotamian marshes. This wasn't a swamp to be drained, but a landscape of incredible abundance. It provided reeds for building houses and boats, plentiful fish and waterfowl, and grazing for animals. It was a vital third pillar of the Sumerian economy, alongside farming and herding. The marshes were so central to their worldview that the main temple of the god Enki at Eridu was called the Iabzu, the House of the Deep Waters, and was described as sitting at the edge of a swamp. For decades, the prosperity of the Uruk period from about 4000 to 3100 BCE was a puzzle. This was when cities exploded in size and writing was invented. But archaeologists couldn't find any evidence for the massive, state-run canal networks that we knew existed in later Mesopotamian history. How did a city like Uruk support tens of thousands of people without large-scale irrigation? This was the early irrigation paradox. The answer, it turns out, was the tide. Groundbreaking research has revealed that between 7,000 and 5,000 years ago, strong tides from the Persian Gulf pushed far up the river valleys. Twice a day, this tidal surge acted like a natural pump, pushing the fresh river water inland and causing it to spill gently over the banks and into the surrounding fields. As the tide went out, the water would drain away, naturally flushing out the harmful salts that plague irrigation in arid climates. This was tidal irrigation, a predictable, sustainable, and highly efficient system that required very little human labor. Early Sumerian farmers only needed to dig short ditches to guide the water to their date palm groves and barley fields. This model of high-yield, low-effort farming perfectly explains how early settlements like Eridu and Uruk could generate huge agricultural surpluses, enough to fuel population growth and the birth of cities, all without a powerful central state managing complex waterworks. Sumer, it seems, was literally built on the rhythms of water. This unique environment was the engine behind the Uruk period, the urban revolution, where small farming villages transformed into the world's first true cities. At its peak, around 2900 BCE, Uruk was the largest city on Earth, possibly housing up to 80,000 people. And its location, along with the other early cities like and Lagash, makes perfect sense. They all cluster in the far south, exactly in the zone where the rivers met the sea, and this tidal irrigation would have been most effective. Society at this time was hierarchical, but power wasn't held by kings. It was concentrated in the temples. The city's temple was the main economic institution, owning land and overseeing the collection and redistribution of the agricultural surplus. It was this complex accounting, tracking grain, livestock, and rations for workers, that drove one of humanity's greatest inventions, writing. The earliest cuneiform tablets from around 3300 BCE are essentially spreadsheets, the meticulous bookkeeping of a temple bureaucracy managing the incredible bounty of the land. This system didn't require a hydraulic despot, a powerful ruler controlling the population by controlling a massive irrigation network. The tidal system was largely self-managing. Organization was local, focused on maintaining small channels and administering the surplus within the temple. This allowed a complex society to develop without the top-down political structures of later kingdoms. The Sumerian worldview was soaked in this watery reality. Their most important gods were tied to natural forces. One of the most powerful was Enki, the god of water, wisdom, and creation. His home was the Abzu, a mythical freshwater ocean deep beneath the earth, which was the source of all rivers, springs, and wells. His temple at Eridu was seen as a direct link to this life-giving source. This is a powerful metaphor for the high water table of the delta, where fresh water truly did seem to well up from the ground. Their myths echo this environment. Enki's great act of creation was separating the sweet fresh waters from the bitter salt waters, a clear reflection of the daily mixing that occurred in the estuaries. The Great Flood myths, which likely inspired the story of Noah's Ark, probably came from the very real and terrifying experience of river floods combining with storm surges from the Gulf, completely inundating the low-lying plains. But the watery paradise that birthed Sumer was not permanent. The same rivers that brought life also brought silt, massive quantities of it carried down from the mountains. This process, called delta progradation, slowly filled in the head of the Persian Gulf, building new land and pushing the coastline steadily southward. As the land advanced, the inland reach of the tides weakened. The natural, twice-daily pulse of fresh water that had so effortlessly irrigated the fields of the Uruk period could no longer penetrate as deeply. The easy, low-effort farming system began to fail. Sometime between 6,000 and 5,000 years ago, Sumer faced a slow-motion ecological crisis. The Sumerian response was a testament to their ingenuity. When nature's irrigation system receded, they were forced to engineer their own. This marks the great shift from the Uruk period to the early dynastic period, around 2900 BCE. It was the shift from natural tidal irrigation to artificial, large-scale river-based or fluvial irrigation. This was the true age of canals. To survive, Sumerian city-states had to undertake enormous, labor-intensive projects, digging extensive canal networks to divert water directly from the river and carry it for kilometers across the plain. Cuneiform records from the city of Lagash, around 2400 BCE, describe a fully developed, four-level irrigation network. There were huge primary canals fed from the river, controlled by sophisticated regulators to manage water flow. These fed into secondary canals for different districts, which in turn supplied smaller ditches that brought water to the individual fields. Building and, just as importantly, constantly maintaining this infrastructure, dredging silt, repairing banks, allocating water, required a level of organization far beyond what the temples could manage. It demanded centralized authority and a massive, coordinated labor force. This environmental pressure is now seen as a key driver for the rise of secular kings and the walled, competing city-states of the early dynastic period. Control of water had become political power. But this new, man-made world came with two devastating new problems: conflict and salt. As city-states invested so much labor in their canals, water became a vital and fiercely contested resource. The most famous example is a centuries-long war between the cities of Lagash and Umma over a fertile basin irrigated by a canal from the Tigris. Inscriptions like the Stele of the Vultures record battles fought and treaties made, all centered on the control of land and water. The second, more insidious threat was salinization. Unlike the natural flushing action of the tides, artificial irrigation in a hot, arid climate is a recipe for disaster. River water contains dissolved salts. When you spread that water on fields, much of it evaporates, leaving the salt behind in the soil. Worse, the constant irrigation raises the underground water table. This salty groundwater is then drawn up to the surface by the sun's heat, where it too evaporates, depositing even more salt. Ancient records show a slow-motion environmental catastrophe. Early on, Sumerian farmers grew a mix of wheat and barley. But wheat is much less tolerant of salt. Over the centuries, the proportion of wheat in the harvest steadily drops. By 2100 BCE, they were growing almost exclusively the hardier, salt-tolerant barley. But even that couldn't last. By 1800 BCE, crop yields for barley itself had plummeted so drastically that the land could no longer support large cities. The once fertile heartland of Sumer had become a white, salt-encrusted wasteland. This progressive soil poisoning was a major factor in the collapse of Sumerian civilization in the south. The economic foundation of great cities like Ur and Uruk crumbled. Between 2100 and 1700 BCE, there was a massive population shift north to areas where rainfall was higher and salinization was less severe. The center of Mesopotamian power moved decisively north to Babylonia, leaving the pioneering cities of Sumer to decay into abandoned mounds in a desert they had inadvertently helped create. The story of Sumer, seen through the lens of Paleo-Hydrology, is a profound cautionary tale. The world's first civilization was a delicate co-creation between human society and a unique, dynamic waterscape. The predictable rhythms of the ancient tides provided the spark, allowing a complex society to blossom. But when that natural system changed, the Sumerians' own remarkable ingenuity, their shift to massive engineering projects, unleashed new social tensions and set in motion an environmental disaster that ultimately destroyed their heartland. From the tidal marshes that birthed the first cities to the salt-choked canals that witnessed their decline, the story of the Sumerians was written in water. They serve as an enduring reminder that while we can reshape our world in incredible ways, we can never truly escape the powerful natural systems that give us life.